November 2013 was the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. A book was written in 2012 by Clint, who was the Secret Service agent to Mrs. Kennedy, and it's entitled Mrs. Kennedy and Me by Clint. It is a very interesting read if you are interested in the Kennedy family, the assassination, blah, blah, blah. I really suggest you read this book. It gives you a behind-the-scenes look that you wouldn't necessarily have. And you have to keep in mind that the 60s were a very different time than the 2010 era. Security just wasn't what it is today around the first family. The book talks about how much time Mrs. Kennedy spent away from the White House, so it kind of makes sense in my mind of if there were affairs and other activities going on. She was rarely there. She spent a lot of time out at her farm, out in Leesburg, Virginia, like the weeks. She would spend the whole week out there. So she was gone a lot from the White House. And again, it was a different era than today's world. Mr. Hill talks about the day of the assassination. He was the Secret Service agent who was walking behind the car and ran and jumped in on the running board and into the back seat with Mrs. Kennedy and pulled her back in. He talks about that day. He talks about how he was the one who went into the morgue and saw the president's body. He details the injuries. He details what he saw, which was a little surprising. Just the emotion of that time, the days following the assassination, her moving on. I got a sense from this book that life hasn't been easy for Mr. Hill. I think the guilt, my projection, just my opinion, the guilt weighed on him from that day. Apparently he was an alcoholic for a number of years, but has kind of changed his life and resurfaced. And I can't imagine having that burden on me for what happened that fateful day in Dallas, when it wasn't his fault. But when that's your job and your duty, I totally get that. But I really recommend, if you're interested in the Kennedys at all, that you pick up the book, read it. It's a pretty easy book, but it will give you some insight into, because he was her personal Secret Service agent, it gives you a different side. She spent a lot of time down in Florida. Again, a different time. But I found it very honest and revealing. Anyway, I'd like to hear your feedback. Did you read it? What were your thoughts about it? Again, we weren't there at that time. That was 50 years ago. My, how time has passed. I will link a video below of my daily vlog on the anniversary of the assassination, and I was 7 years old, and how I heard about it and what I remember from that day and that time period. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll link that below. Have a great one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.